The maid had been finishing her evening chores when she decided to take the long way home. The streets were quiet, and the sun had just dipped below the horizon, leaving a soft orange glow across the town. She enjoyed this part of the day when the world seemed to slow down. She could breathe without the noise of work pressing on her. She carried a small basket with a few groceries she had bought for her family. Her steps were light, but her mind was heavy with thoughts about the day and how she would manage the little money she earned. As she turned a corner near the old road that led out of town, she noticed something unusual. There, on the side of the road, lay a man. At first, she thought he might be sleeping, but then she saw his arm twitch slightly. The street was empty, and a faint chill ran through the air. She froze for a moment, unsure whether to approach. But the moment her eyes met the man's face, something inside her shifted. He was pale, and his eyes were wide open, filled with fear and confusion. She could see that he was struggling to move, but his body refused to respond. He was paralyzed. Fear and caution ran through her mind. She did not know who he was or what had happened, but she could not walk away. She approached slowly, keeping a safe distance at first. "Sir, are you okay?" she asked softly, her voice trembling slightly. He blinked and tried to respond, but no words came out. She knelt beside him, feeling a mixture of days slowly turned into weeks. The man's condition began to show subtle improvements. His eyes followed the maid more consistently and occasionally. He would respond to her voice with a small blink or a slight turn of his head. The maid noticed these changes with a mix of hope and relief. Every small sign of life encouraged her to continue. Despite the exhaustion she felt after endless hours at the hospital, she had grown deeply attached to him. And he, in his own silent way, seemed the man had gradually regained enough strength to sit more comfortably in his bed, and his attempts at speaking became more consistent. The maid, who had been by his side through every long night and early morning, felt a mixture of pride, relief, and joy at the progress he had made. Though his voice was still weak, the words he managed to speak carried immense meaning. He began to express gratitude in small ways, squeezing her hand, blinking in response to her words, or managing a faint nod. One morning he looked at her with clarity and determination. With her guidance, he tried to say more complete sentences. Though broken and slow, his speech began to reveal fragments of his identity. The maid listened patiently, her heart swelling with the realization that he was not only recovering physically, but was also reconnecting with himself. His expressions grew more purposeful, his eyes sparkled with recognition of his surroundings and, more importantly, of her presence. The hospital staff were astonished by the transformation. They had never seen such progress in someone who had been so abandoned and helpless. The maid's dedication, care, and patience were evident to everyone around her. She had become not just a caregiver but a lifeline, a source of hope, and a bridge to life for a man who had been left in despair. Each small victory in his recovery was also a victory for her, testament to her unwavering commitment. The man began to share bits of his past as he regained the strength to speak. He described a life that had been filled with influence, responsibility, and unexpected dangers. The maid listened carefully, never interrupting, allowing him to reveal the truth in his own time. She learned that he was someone who had been highly respected in business and social circles, someone whose disappearance had caused concern among many. Yet, despite his wealth and status, he was grateful for the simple acts of kindness that had kept him alive. She realized that the man she had found on the road, weak and paralyzed, had once lived a life far removed from hardship. This contrast made her admiration for him grow. Despite his previous status, he was humble, respectful, and gentle in his interactions with her. The maid saw that his experiences had changed him, bringing a vulnerability that allowed her care to have a profound impact. She understood that kindness could cross social boundaries and transform lives in ways that wealth or influence could not. Over time, he began to move more freely, managing short exercises and stretches with her assistance. Each day he grew stronger, and with each improvement, the maid felt a quiet sense of satisfaction and hope. She marveled at how resilience and patience, combined with her support, had allowed him to reclaim pieces of his life that had seemed lost. Their connection deepened, built on mutual respect, trust, and shared experiences of struggle and recovery as his health improved. He also began to acknowledge her presence in more personal ways. He would attempt to speak her name, though imperfectly, and his eyes would follow her movements around the room with a sense of recognition and gratitude. He began to smile, laugh softly at her gentle jokes, and respond to her stories with subtle gestures. These moments filled the maid with joy and reinforced the bond that had grown stronger with every day spent together. Eventually, he was able to recount more details of the events that had led him to the road. He spoke of circumstances that had left him vulnerable, of mistakes and betrayals, and of an accident that had rendered him paralyzed. The maid listened intently, offering comfort and reassurance. She realized that beyond the physical recovery, he was healing emotionally, learning to trust and accept care after experiencing abandonment. Her role had been essential in this transformation. News of his identity began to spread. The hospital staff started preparing for his eventual departure. Yet the maid remained by his side, quietly continuing her work, ensuring that he was ready for the world beyond the hospital. She felt a mix of pride and nervousness, understanding that their lives were about to change in profound ways. Though she had entered his life as a stranger, she had become a pivotal part of his journey back to life. One afternoon, he managed to speak with clarity and sincerity. "Thank you," he said, his voice strong enough to carry the weight of his emotions. The maid smiled, feeling tears prick her eyes. She had saved a life, yes, but she had also formed a connection that would last beyond the hospital walls. The man's gratitude was not just for survival. It was for the care, patience, and humanity she had shown when the world had failed him. As he prepared to leave the hospital, the maid helped him gather his belongings, ensuring that he was comfortable and confident. She guided him through exercises, helped him dress, and offered encouragement every step of the way. She knew that their journey together had not only restored his body, but had also strengthened his spirit. He had regained a sense of purpose, identity, and trust, all nurtured by her consistent care. When he finally stepped out of the hospital, supported by medical aides and her steady presence, the reality of the outside world struck him. The sunlight, the bustling streets, and the familiar sounds of life reminded him of the world he had been disconnected from. The maid walked beside him, providing reassurance and steady guidance. She had been his anchor in the storm, and now she was helping him navigate the new chapter of his life. He began to reconnect with his family, friends, and business associates. Though they had been searching for him, it was the maid's care that had allowed him to survive and regain enough strength to return to them. Her name became known to those around him, not as a servant, but as the person whose courage, patience, and kindness had saved his life. Her humility and compassion earned her respect and admiration, though she remained modest, focused on the impact of her actions rather than recognition. As time passed, the man's life gradually returned to normal, but he never forgot the maid who had been there when he was at his lowest. He ensured that her efforts were acknowledged and rewarded in ways that would provide stability, comfort, and recognition. Yet she remained grounded, living simply, and continuing to embody the kindness and dedication that had guided her throughout this journey. She had changed his life forever, but the experience had also transformed her own, giving her a sense of purpose, confidence, and pride she had never known before. Their bond remained strong even after he resumed his life. He would visit her, seek her counsel, and express gratitude in subtle, meaningful ways. She, in turn, continued to care for him with a quiet dedication, ensuring that the trust, empathy, and respect they had built over weeks of hardship remained intact. Their lives had intertwined in ways neither could have anticipated. Demonstrating the profound impact of human compassion, the maid often reflected on the journey they had shared. She remembered the night she found him, abandoned on the road, the long nights at the hospital, the countless hours of care, and the gradual signs of progress that had kept her motivated. She realized that acts of kindness, no matter how small or seemingly insignificant, could change lives in unimaginable ways. Her courage, empathy, and determination had not only saved a life, but had also transformed her own sense of purpose and understanding of humanity. In the end, the man regained enough independence to live safely and confidently. He embraced the opportunities to rebuild his life, always carrying with him the lessons of humility, gratitude, and compassion that had emerged from his experience. The maid had been the silent force behind this transformation, and her unwavering dedication remained a source of inspiration and admiration for all who knew her story. The story concluded with both of them profoundly changed. He had survived, healed, and regained a sense of identity and purpose. She had discovered courage, empathy, and the power of selfless care. Their connection, forged in moments of crisis and nurtured through patience and kindness, it created a lasting impact that neither could forget. Life had brought them together in the most unexpected circumstances, but through compassion and humanity, they had changed each other's lives forever. The maid continued her daily life, but with a quiet sense of pride and fulfillment. She had learned that even ordinary people could make extraordinary differences in the lives of others. The man, once abandoned and helpless, now carried her influence in every step he took toward recovery and every decision he made in his renewed life. Their story became a testament to the power of kindness, courage, and human connection, leaving an enduring mark on both their hearts and the lives they touched around them. Ed to recognize her presence as a source of comfort. Though he could not speak, there was a quiet understanding between them. She would describe her day, the small happenings of the town, the gossip of neighbors, and even the antics of stray animals she had encountered on her way to the hospital. At first, he seemed unresponsive, but gradually, she noticed subtle reactions. A twitch of a finger, a small movement of his eyelids, a faint change in his expression. She smiled softly each time, whispering words of encouragement and hope. The hospital staff continued to assist, showing her how to perform basic physical therapy exercises to prevent atrophy and keep his muscles slightly engaged. She learned quickly, and she spent long hours helping him shift, stretch, and move as much as he could manage. At first he resisted, frustrated at the limitations of his body. Sometimes he would push against her hands or try to move on his own, only to fail and slump back exhausted. She would gently soothe him, telling him that patience was key and that every small effort counted. Her voice was calm, steady, and full of warmth. During these weeks, she noticed small details about him that piqued her curiosity. His clothes were always neat even though he had been abandoned. His watch was expensive, and the careful way he carried himself, even in paralysis, suggested a background that was not ordinary. She wondered about his life before the accident. Who was he? Why had he been left on the road? Her questions remained unanswered, and though she longed to know, she understood that pressing him for answers was impossible. For now, her role was to provide care and support, not to probe into his past. Occasionally, he would look at her in ways that seemed deliberate, as if he were trying to communicate something. She would meet his gaze and speak softly, encouraging him to continue, acknowledging his presence and reassuring him that he was not alone. She began to feel that there was a depth to him that went beyond his current condition. Something noble, something that carried the weight of a life she had yet to understand. The thought made her feel both curious and respectful. The bond between them grew stronger as the days went by. She began to notice that her thoughts were consumed by him even outside the hospital. She worried when he was resting, prayed for his recovery, and often imagined how he might feel trapped inside his own body. Her empathy was profound, and her dedication did not go unnoticed by the hospital staff. They respected her commitment, often commenting on how unusual it was for someone with no personal connection to care so completely. She smiled, acknowledging their words. But her focus remained solely on him. One afternoon, while she was helping him adjust in bed, he made a small sound. It was faint, almost a whisper, but it startled her. Her heart raced, and she leaned closer, speaking softly, asking him if he could try again. He repeated the sound, slightly louder this time. She encouraged him, repeating words of support. Though it was not yet speech, it was progress, and it filled her with a deep sense of accomplishment. She realized that patience and consistent care were beginning to yield results. As the weeks progressed, the maid found herself sharing more of her life with him. She spoke of her family, her childhood, her dreams, and the struggles she faced daily. She described small moments, like the way the wind carried the scent of flowers in spring, or how the rain made puddles dance on the streets. She spoke to him not only to comfort him, but also to maintain a sense of normalcy in both their lives. Even though he could not speak, she believed that hearing her voice, stories, and laughter helped him stay connected to the world. The man's reactions became more pronounced. Sometimes his eyes would light up. Sometimes his fingers would twitch in rhythm with her words. She felt a quiet joy in these moments, sensing that her care and attention were making a difference. It was not just physical healing. It was emotional, psychological, and deeply human. She had become an anchor for him in a world that had abandoned him. One evening, she noticed a photograph tucked into the corner of his bag. It was partially hidden, but she could make out the faint outline of a building that seemed familiar. She gently picked it up and studied it, wondering what connection it had to him. He shifted slightly as she held it, and she quickly placed it back, sensing that it might be private. Still, curiosity gnawed at her. She felt that there was more to him than met the eye, that his past held secrets, and that she was slowly discovering clues to a life she could not yet imagine as she continued her care. She observed small, subtle traits that suggested refinement and sophistication. The way he held his hand even when paralyzed, the careful way he adjusted himself, the faint gestures of manners in his posture all hinted at a life far removed from the street where she had found him. She did not ask. She respected his silence, but she could not help but wonder who he really was and why someone of such apparent background had been left. Helpless and abandoned, her compassion never waned. Even when he became frustrated or agitated, she remained patient, gently guiding him through movements, soothing him with soft words, and maintaining a calm presence. She had learned to read the smallest signs, the tiniest twitches, and she responded with care and understanding. Every small effort became a step toward building trust and connection. The hospital environment also taught her valuable lessons. She interacted with doctors, nurses, and other staff, learning medical terms, techniques, and procedures. She discovered that caring for someone in such a condition required not only love and compassion, but also knowledge, attentiveness, and discipline. She absorbed every detail, often practicing when no one was watching, ensuring she could provide the best care possible. During these weeks, she sometimes wondered about the man's identity, imagining stories that could explain his presence on the road. Was he a businessman who had enemies? A traveler who met with misfortune? A person who had been betrayed or abandoned? Each theory seemed plausible, but she reminded herself that, for now, his past was secondary. His survival and comfort were her priorities. She also began to notice changes within herself. Her perspective on life had shifted. Small problems she had once worried about now seemed insignificant. She had discovered resilience, patience, and a capacity for love and dedication she had not known existed. She had become more empathetic, more aware of the fragility and unpredictability of life, and more determined to act when others were in need. One morning, she noticed that he followed her movements with his eyes more deliberately than before. She took it as a sign that he was becoming more aware of his surroundings and of her presence. She spoke softly, telling him about the day ahead, describing what she would do, and imagining small scenarios to engage him mentally. Though he could not respond yet, she felt that he was listening, absorbing, and understanding more than anyone could see. The bond between them deepened further when she began to notice emotional responses. When she laughed softly at a memory, he would twitch slightly as if responding. When she sang a gentle tune, his breathing would change subtly. These moments filled her heart with joy and hope. She realized that healing was not just about physical therapy, but also about emotional connection, trust, and companionship. Despite the gradual progress, the maid remained cautious. She knew that recovery was unpredictable and that setbacks could occur. She remained vigilant, attentive, and patient, never allowing frustration or fatigue to interfere with her dedication. Each day was a challenge, but also an opportunity to make a difference, to nurture life, and to create a sense of security for someone who had experienced abandonment. As the weeks passed, she became more attuned to the man's subtle cues. She noticed changes in his breathing, shifts in his gaze, and even small facial expressions that suggested recognition, thought, or emotion. She responded to each sign with care, speaking, touching gently, and encouraging movement. She felt a growing sense of responsibility, not just as a caretaker, but as someone who had become an essential part of his journey toward recovery. The maid also began to imagine the future. She wondered what he would say when he could speak, how he would share his story, and what life awaited him beyond the hospital walls. She realized that her role would continue to be vital, that her presence, patience, and compassion could shape not only his recovery, but also his perception of humanity and trust. She felt a quiet pride in her ability to provide such care without expecting anything in return. During this time, she occasionally caught glimpses of personal items that hinted at a different life: an expensive pen, a neatly folded handkerchief, a carefully kept notebook. These small clues fueled her curiosity, but she did not pry. She respected his silence and focused on his care, allowing the truth of his identity to reveal itself in its own time. She had learned that trust and patience were more powerful than immediate answers. By the end of this third part of their journey, the maid had become inseparable from the man. She had witnessed progress, nurtured trust, and provided unwavering care. She had discovered a depth of empathy, resilience, and dedication within herself. The man, in turn, had begun to respond to her presence, showing signs of awareness, recognition, and emotional connection. Though his past remained a mystery, the bond between them had grown unshakable, and the path toward his recovery was now illuminated by hope, patience, and the quiet strength of human compassion. Weeks had passed since the maid had found the paralyzed man on the road, and slowly signs of recovery were becoming more visible. He had begun to move his hands more deliberately, and on some occasions, he could shift his upper body slightly when she assisted him. Each of these small victories filled the maid with joy and strengthened the bond she had built with him over this time. Though he still could not speak, his eyes seemed to hold a new awareness, a quiet acknowledgement of her unwavering presence. The hospital staff were equally amazed by his progress. They often mentioned that his improvement was unusual for someone in his condition and credited her consistent care, his patience, and emotional support. She took their words humbly, knowing that it was her dedication and the quiet connection she shared with him that truly made the difference. She remained by his side for long hours, reading stories, describing the world outside, and speaking softly about everyday life. Her voice became a constant comfort, a bridge between his silent world and the one he had been forced to leave behind. One evening, as she was helping him adjust his position in bed, she noticed a small photograph tucked into the corner of his bag. She picked it up carefully, examining it without disturbing the rest of his belongings. The photograph showed a grand building, polished and elegant, with people walking purposefully around it. There was something about it that felt familiar, though she could not place it immediately. Her curiosity grew, but she reminded herself that she had to respect his privacy. For now, her focus was on his recovery. Over the next few days, she began noticing more subtle clues about his past. The way he held himself, even when limited by paralysis, suggested someone accustomed to dignity and authority. His clothing and personal items, although simple now, hinted at a life of wealth or influence. She saw the careful craftsmanship of his shoes, the quality of his watch, and even the faint marks of manicured hands. Each detail painted a picture of a life that seemed worlds away from the abandoned state in which she had found him. Despite her growing curiosity, she never pressed him for answers. She understood that trust could not be forced, and that he would reveal his story when he was ready. In the meantime, she continued her daily care routines with unwavering attention. She fed him carefully, assisted with exercises to prevent muscle deterioration, and read to him from newspapers and books. She described the sights and sounds of the town outside, hoping to give him a sense of the world he had missed. Then came a breakthrough moment. One morning, as she was helping him sit up, he managed to move his head more clearly toward her. She noticed the way his eyes followed her movements, tracking her across the room. Encouraged, she spoke softly, urging him to continue. He responded with subtle movements, almost as if he were trying to communicate. Her heart raced with hope. She knew that communication, even in its smallest form, was a critical step in his recovery and in understanding who he really was. The days that followed brought more progress. He began to squeeze her hand gently in response to her words, a gesture that spoke volumes despite his inability to speak. She smiled at these small moments, recognizing them as signs of his growing awareness and trust. The bond they shared had become unshakable, built on patience, empathy, and countless hours of care. She had become his lifeline, the person who ensured that he did not feel abandoned or forgotten. It was during one quiet afternoon that the revelation began to unfold. A nurse accidentally left a medical report on the table while stepping out briefly. The maid glanced at it, initially by accident, and her eyes widened. The report included personal details, his full name, the city of residence, and a brief medical history. She could hardly believe what she was reading. The man she had cared for so diligently, the one lying helplessly in the hospital bed, was not an ordinary person. He was a wealthy and influential figure, someone whose disappearance had been a matter of concern for many. Shock and disbelief ran through her mind. She sat down slowly, taking a moment to process the information. She realized that the man she had known as vulnerable and silent was someone of great importance, someone whose life had been surrounded by privilege and responsibility. Her curiosity about his past was now answered, at least partially, but it brought a new set of questions. Why had he been left on the road? Who had abandoned him? How had his life led to this moment? When she returned to his side, she noticed him trying to move, as if he sensed her reaction. She spoke softly, maintaining her calm and reassuring tone. "You are safe now. Everything will be okay," she whispered. She did not reveal that she had seen the report. For now, it was enough to continue providing comfort and care. She understood that trust had to remain intact, and any sudden revelation could overwhelm him. Over the next few days, she observed subtle changes in his behavior. He seemed more aware of her presence, following her movements with his eyes and reacting to her voice in ways that suggested understanding. She began to notice small gestures that hinted at recognition or familiarity, though she could not yet interpret them fully. It became clear that her role had become even more significant. She was not only a caregiver, but a silent witness to the man's rediscovery of himself and his surroundings. The hospital staff, too, began to treat him with additional respect. Realizing that the man was someone of high status, they adjusted their interactions, spoke more formally, and provided extra attention to his needs. The maid observed these changes quietly, aware that his identity would soon become public knowledge. She focused instead on her work, ensuring that every aspect of his care remained consistent and thorough. One evening, as she helped him with gentle exercises, he made a sound, faint but deliberate. Her eyes widened in surprise and joy. She leaned closer, speaking softly, encouraging him to repeat the sound. Over the course of the next few minutes, he managed to produce a few more noises, small attempts at speech. Her heart swelled. After weeks of silent connection, the first signs of verbal communication had begun. She responded with praise and gentle encouragement. Knowing that each sound was a milestone in his journey back to life and self-expression, as the days passed, she continued to observe and nurture his progress. His eyes followed her movements, his fingers twitched in response to her words, and he began to show small but meaningful attempts at communication. She realized that she had not only provided physical care, but had also created a safe space for him to regain trust, confidence, and a sense of presence in the world. Her patience and dedication had paved the way for his recovery in ways she could never have anticipated. Finally, one quiet morning, he managed to speak a few words. His voice was weak, hoarse, but unmistakable. The maid's heart leaped with joy. She encouraged him gently, helping him repeat the words, providing reassurance and support. Each syllable he uttered was a victory, a testament to his resilience and her unwavering care. She felt a deep sense of fulfillment, knowing that her dedication had not only saved his life, but it also helped restore his ability to communicate, to express himself, and to reclaim a part of his lost identity. With this breakthrough, the maid began to glimpse the full reality of the man's identity. She realized that he was someone whose life had been filled with responsibility, influence, and public attention. Her care had allowed him to survive, heal, and slowly regain the capacity to connect with the world around him. She felt a mixture of awe, respect, and humility. She had entered his life as a stranger, but through compassion, patience, and dedication, she had become an essential part of his journey back to life. In the following days, she continued her work, helping him improve his strength, encouraging communication, and providing emotional support. The man's recognition of her presence grew stronger, and the bond they shared became undeniable. He began to show glimpses of personality, of humor, and even of gratitude. Though the story of his past remained largely unspoken, the maid sensed that he would eventually share it when the time was right. As the fourth part of their journey concluded, the maid reflected on everything that had happened. She had saved a life, nurtured trust, and provided care that went beyond the physical needs of the body. She had witnessed resilience, human strength, and the transformative power of compassion. The man's true identity, once a mystery, had begun to reveal itself, and she understood that the next steps of their journey would bring even greater revelations. Her role had been pivotal, and she was ready to face whatever came next. Knowing that her presence had changed both their lives forever, of worry and determination. She knew that staying with him was the right thing to do. The maid looked around. There were no cars, no people, and the road seemed abandoned. She realized she could not leave him there, not for even a minute. Her heart raced as she tried to think of a solution. She remembered a small hospital a few kilometers away and knew she had to get him there. But moving a paralyzed man was not easy. She needed help. She quickly pulled out her phone and called a local driver she knew who often helped with emergencies. The driver, surprised by the call, promised to arrive quickly. While waiting, she carefully checked him for injuries. His clothes were torn in places and his skin had marks that suggested he had fallen or been left there for a while. She draped her coat over his shoulders to keep him warm and spoke to him, even though he could not answer. "You're safe now. Don't worry. Help is on the way," she said gently. She felt a strange bond forming already, a silent promise that she would not abandon him, no matter what. The minutes felt like hours, but finally a vehicle arrived. Two men jumped out to help, and together they carefully lifted him into the car. She climbed in with them, holding his hand lightly, afraid to let go. On the way to the hospital, she kept talking to him, telling him about small things, trying to calm him and herself. Every little sign of his blinking or slight movement made her heart skip. She realized how fragile life could be and how quickly circumstances could change for anyone at the hospital. The staff immediately took over. The maid explained what had happened and the doctors rushed to examine him. They were impressed by her quick thinking and her courage in bringing him in. She waited outside the emergency room, pacing back and forth, praying silently. Hours passed, and the night deepened, but she refused to leave. Even when her body grew tired, her spirit stayed awake with worry and hope. Eventually, a doctor came out. His face was serious, but he nodded at her. "He's stable for now," he said. "It will take time to know the full extent of his injuries, but your quick actions saved his life." Relief washed over her and tears came to her eyes. She had not thought about saving a life that night, but she had acted without hesitation. It felt strange, powerful, and humbling all at once. The maid decided to stay by his side. She spoke to the nurses and offered to help in any way she could, even if it was just sitting with him or helping him eat. She felt a deep connection, a responsibility she could not explain. For hours, she sat quietly watching over him. She noticed small details, the way his fingers twitched, the way his breathing changed, and the faint rise and fall of his chest. Every small sign of life reassured her that she had made the right choice. As the night passed, she thought about his situation. Who would leave a man like this on the road? Why had no one else come to help? She felt anger mixed with compassion, a strange cocktail of emotions that left her restless. Yet she refused to let fear dominate her. She was determined to be there for him, to give him a chance at life, no matter the cost. By morning, the hospital began to settle into its routine. She learned more about the man from the nurses. He was strong and resilient, but his body had suffered greatly. She continued to sit by his side, speaking softly, telling him stories about her small life, hoping her voice would give him comfort. She realized that in that moment, the boundaries between them did not matter. He was a human being, vulnerable and in need, and she was the only one who had offered help without hesitation. The maid's thoughts wandered. She wondered if he had family or friends who would come for him. She worried that the world could be cruel, leaving people abandoned when they needed help the most. She felt a surge of empathy, stronger than she had ever felt before. It was as if fate had placed her there for a reason. She did not yet know the story behind the man, but she knew her actions mattered. Hours turned into a full day, and she did not leave. She coordinated with the hospital staff, ensuring he was fed, comfortable, and monitored. She held his hand gently when he stirred, whispering words of encouragement. The staff began to admire her dedication, noting how unusual it was for someone with no personal connection to care so deeply. Yet for her it was simple. She was doing what any kind soul would do when faced with another human in need. Throughout that day, she noticed small signs of consciousness returning in the man. He would blink, move his eyes, or slightly shift his head when she spoke. It filled her with hope and determination. She began to imagine the day he would speak again, the day he could tell her his story. She did not yet know his name, but she felt that learning it would not change anything. She would care for him regardless. As evening approached, the maid realized how much the encounter had changed her. She felt a deeper understanding of human fragility and strength. She had come into the night carrying simple groceries, and she was leaving with a sense of purpose she had never known. She had saved a life, yes, but she had also discovered her own courage, patience, and compassion in ways she could not have imagined. The man remained unconscious but stable, and she knew that the journey was just beginning. She would not leave him, not now, not ever. The bond formed that night was more than circumstance. It was an unspoken promise of care, loyalty, and hope. The maid, once just a simple worker in a quiet town, had become a guardian, a lifeline, and a witness to the resilience of the human spirit. Night fell once again, and she sat beside him, her hand resting lightly on his arm. She whispered words of comfort and encouragement, imagining a future where he could speak, move, and tell her the story that had brought him to that lonely road. In her heart, she knew that whatever his past, whatever his secrets, she would be there. She would stay, watch, and protect him, because she had seen the fragility of life and had chosen to act with courage and kindness. That night marked the beginning of a journey that neither of them could yet imagine. A journey that would change both of their lives forever. The next morning, the hospital was already busy with patients and staff moving quickly from room to room. The maid, tired but determined, had stayed the night beside the man. She had slept only a few hours in the chair near his bed, but she had not minded. Her eyes, though heavy with exhaustion, were filled with concern. She watched him breathe, hoping for any small sign of progress. The doctors had informed her that his injuries were severe. His spine was damaged, leaving him paralyzed, and he had some bruises and minor cuts that needed attention. But what worried them more was his overall condition. Being abandoned on the road for so long could have caused serious complications. The maid felt a surge of responsibility. She knew that, without her quick action, he might not have survived. Nurses came in to check his vitals, and the maid offered to help. She learned how to adjust his position to prevent bed sores, how to clean his wounds carefully, and how to feed him when he could not move. Though the tasks were challenging, she found purpose in them. Each small success, like a blink, a sigh, or a slight twitch of his fingers, felt like a victory. She encouraged him softly, speaking as if he could understand every word. She believed that her presence, her voice, her constant attention could help him heal not just physically, but emotionally as well. Days passed slowly. The maid kept a routine of visiting him, sometimes for hours, sometimes staying through the night. She brought him small comforts from home: a warm blanket, a piece of fruit, a bottle of water. She read to him from newspapers and magazines, described the sounds of the town outside, and even told him stories about her childhood. At first, he did not respond much, but gradually, tiny movements began. A twitch of an eyebrow, a faint squeeze of her hand, a small turn of the head. Each sign filled her with hope and determination. The hospital staff watched her closely, impressed by her dedication. They had seen many patients, but few had someone so committed without expecting anything in return. They occasionally offered advice, teaching her how to manage his care, how to prevent infections, and how to support his muscles through gentle movement. She absorbed everything quickly, learning more each day. She felt that her life had purpose now, beyond her simple daily routines. She had a mission, and she took it seriously. Despite his condition, she noticed glimpses of his personality. When she spoke softly, she could see small expressions on his face, like he was trying to communicate. Sometimes he would blink in rhythm with her words, or his lips would move as if he was forming sounds. She responded patiently, talking to him as though he could hear her perfectly. She imagined that each word she spoke was a thread connecting them, helping him feel less alone in his silent world. She began to wonder about his past. Who was he? Why had he been left on that road? He had refused to speak about his life, and the hospital staff had no information either. She found a small notebook among his belongings, but it was empty. There were no letters, no identification, nothing to hint at his story. Yet she noticed small things. His clothing was of fine quality, his shoes well made, and even his wristwatch seemed expensive. These details made her curious, though she knew curiosity had to wait. First, he had to survive. While caring for him, she faced challenges she had never encountered. Some days, he would become restless, frustrated by his inability to move. He would try to push himself or make sounds, and she would gently hold him and calm him. On one occasion, he became so agitated that he accidentally knocked over the water cup, spilling it on the bed. The maid cleaned it up quickly, speaking reassuringly. She realized that patience was as important as physical care. Her compassion, she understood, had to be limitless. The townspeople began to notice her commitment. Some stopped by the hospital to check on him, offering food, advice, or even just words of encouragement. She thanked them politely but continued her work quietly, focusing on the man. There was a quiet strength in her that drew respect from everyone who saw it. She did not seek recognition. Her only goal was to see him survive and recover. One afternoon, she was helping him change position. He suddenly moved his hand slightly. It was almost imperceptible, but she caught it immediately. Her heart raced. She spoke softly, telling him he was doing well, that she was proud of his effort. She knew these small victories were crucial, both for him and for her. Each moment of progress strengthened their bond, though he could not speak yet, and she could not fully understand him. The maid began to notice that his reactions were sometimes more than physical. Occasionally, when she told him a story about her childhood, he would blink in rhythm with her words, or his lips would curl slightly. It was as if he was listening, absorbing everything, even if he could not respond. She spoke to him for hours, sharing memories, hopes, and dreams. It became clear to her that emotional care was as important as medical care. She could see that her presence, her voice, her gentle touch were helping him hold on to life. As days turned into a week, the man showed signs of improvement. He began to respond with slight movements and occasional eye contact. The hospital staff were amazed. They told her that her dedication had made a real difference. She smiled quietly, not seeking praise but feeling a deep sense of satisfaction. She knew that her actions were saving a life. That realization filled her with pride and humility. Despite the improvement, the maid noticed that he seemed to have a sense of mystery around him. He would sometimes look at her as if he knew her, though she had never met him before. His eyes held a depth she could not understand. It made her curious but also cautious. She knew that soon. She might discover his true identity, but for now, she focused on helping him heal. One evening, after the hospital had quieted down, she sat beside him and whispered, "You are safe now. You don't have to be afraid anymore. I will stay with you." She held his hand, feeling its slight warmth, and knew that this connection was more than duty. It was human compassion at its purest. In that moment, she understood that saving him was not just about physical survival, but also about providing hope, comfort, and companionship. She thought about her own life, the struggles she faced daily, and realized how small they seemed in comparison to what she was witnessing. She felt grateful for her health, for her family, and for the opportunity to help someone in need. It was a lesson in empathy, in courage, and in the unexpected ways life could bring people together. The man's progress continued, slowly but steadily. He began to respond to her voice more consistently, and sometimes his eyes followed her movements around the room. The maid felt a mixture of relief and anticipation. She knew that recovery would be long and difficult, but each day brought hope. She had become not just a caretaker, but a constant presence in his life, someone he could trust without question. During this time, she began to notice small signs that hinted at a more complex past. A faint scar on his hand, the way he held himself despite paralysis, and the subtle elegance in his gestures all suggested he had not always been in this condition. She wondered about his life before the road, before the accident, before he became someone who needed saving. But she knew that these questions would have to wait. Right now, her focus was on the present, on ensuring he survived and regained strength. The maid also faced her own challenges. She was exhausted, often running on little sleep, but she never wavered. Her family worried about her, urging her to rest. But she explained that she could not leave him. It was more than a responsibility. It was a calling. She found strength she did not know she had, fueled by compassion, determination, and the growing bond she felt with him. Weeks passed, and the man began to show signs of greater awareness. Sometimes he would follow her with his eyes, or respond with a subtle gesture. These small signs filled the maid with hope and pride. She knew that each tiny step was significant. She continued to care for him with patience and love, speaking to him about her life, sharing memories, and creating a sense of normalcy in his confined world. The hospital staff often commented on her dedication. They had never seen such selfless care from someone outside the medical profession. She simply smiled, explaining that she was doing what anyone would do if they found someone in need. But deep inside, she knew it was more than that. She felt a bond growing between them, a silent understanding that transcended words. She was not just saving a life, she was becoming a part of it. By the end of the second part of her journey, the maid had witnessed the beginning of recovery in the man. She had faced exhaustion, uncertainty, and emotional strain, but she had not faltered. Each small improvement reinforced her belief that her presence mattered. She had discovered that healing was not only about medical care, but also about compassion, patience, and connection. She had become a lifeline, a constant source of hope, and a symbol of kindness in a world that had left him abandoned. As she sat beside him one quiet evening, watching him rest, she whispered softly, "We will get through this together. I promise." In that moment, she felt a profound sense of purpose and an unspoken bond that would guide the rest of their journey together. She knew that the story of this man, his past, and his true identity was still to be revealed. But she was ready to face whatever came next, as long as she could stay by his side.